Welcome. Thank you for coming out on this hot and humid day. I hope it's pleasant to be in the air conditioning. And I wanted to give a brief introduction to our presenter this afternoon. Chris Petrak happens to be my father. So I'm a little biased, but I can also say he is a very experienced ornithologist. He and my mom lived in Vermont for over 20 years, during which time my father was very involved in the birding community and wrote a regular newspaper column about bird watching. He's also published a few books, which are on the table to the side, including some compendiums of the columns that were in the Brattleboro Reformer. So this is a general introduction to birding, hopefully capturing the interest of both novice and experienced bird watchers. And I guess that's it. I'll turn it over to my father, the Reverend Chris.
Okay, thank you very much for being here. It's always fun to talk about one's hobbies. And at points it probably became more than that. I had the good fortune when we lived in Vermont of being able to connect and learn from some exceptional birders, and then built myself a library and continued to teach myself a lot more. So we're going to talk about a few birds today. But before we get into the birds, we need to know just a little bit about the context of where we are. Here in southeastern Pennsylvania is where ornithology got its start. We all know Benjamin Franklin, who was world-renowned as a scientist, at least if you keep the world just to Europe and its allies. World-renowned in the 1700s, but also almost as well known was John Bartram, who founded Bartram's Gardens, the first botanical gardens in North America. And John Bartram was known to some of the top botanists in Europe as probably the finest field botanist in the world. He went all through the Atlantic states, collecting plants, sending them to England, and making a business out of selling seeds to the well-to-do in Europe. His son was William Bartram, who did extensive travels in the South, studying the flora and the fauna, discovering many new kinds of plants to science. Wrote a book called, well, I won't give you the full title, it's known today as The Travels of Bartram, published in 1793 and still in print. Now that's quite remarkable. He was also, after those travels, continued to study birds and was probably the best ornithologist in North America during his lifetime. The father of American ornithology is Alexander Wilson, who studied, became friends with William, used his library, discovered that the Europeans who wrote about American birds didn't know what they were talking about, and decided audaciously to write accounts of all of the birds of North America. And it was published as American Ornithology in 9 volumes, the last posthumously between about 1808 and 1813. Now somebody's going to ask me, what about Audubon? And of course his home is very nearby. And Audubon was an outstanding artist. But frankly, as an ornithologist, he couldn't hold a candle to Alexander Wilson. And many of Audubon's accounts, as I've read them and compared them to what Wilson's wrote, Audubon was just sort of reflecting Wilson without crediting him. Anyway, that's all. If you want to know more about the birth of American ornithology, I've got a book over there. So we're going to start off with, in the basics of bird watching, with tools for bird watching. Obviously, the first one is binoculars, and I pulled a couple of pieces off of the website for featheredgeoptics.org, which is the Cape May Bird Observatory. That is their outlet for their optics. And they have on their website 100 different kinds of binoculars, ranging in price from $99 to $3,500. Yeah. So what are the basics about binoculars that you might need to know? This is the eyepiece. They're usually 7 or 8 or 9 or 10, or 7, 8, or 10. That's how many times it's magnifying what you're seeing through this piece. The second number on a binocular is the objective lens, and this simply measures the diameter of the lens. These are 8 by 32, so that means this lens is 32 millimeters. If this were an 8 by 42, that would mean a wider lens here, a heavier binocular, a wider range of field. Okay, but I want to see the birds closer, so how about getting the 10 by 42? You'll narrow down what you actually see through this stand. Decent binoculars can be had for between $200 and $500. And you're all right buying a binocular in that price range online. If you have questions, and I strongly recommend the Feather Edge Optics in the Cape May Bird Observatory. Those people know their binoculars, and if you want a pair of binoculars and don't know, if you want to keep it under $500 or $200 or $300, give them a call and tell them what you're looking for, and they can help you. If you go more than that, this is the pair that I use. They're smaller, but they're still 8 by 32s. These are about $2,100. Now, the difference between a $300 pair and a $2,100 pair, this is lighter, smaller. The coating on the lens is much better, which will give a clearer and sharper picture. And if you hold them out like this and drop them, you won't hurt this one, but you might hurt this one. If you're going to spend more than $500, you want to try the binocular. And it's worth a weekend in Cape May to go to the Cape May Observatory and try their binoculars, feel them in hand, because there's lots of differences. So that's a real quick primer on binoculars. I've taken here some of the less expensive ones. The Vortex is $250, the Nikon Monarch. I know a lot of fine birders who use the Nikon Monarch. That's about $290, and you can keep right on going. The $99 pair I wouldn't recommend, but in the $150 to $300 or $400 range, up to $500, you can get a decent pair of binoculars that you can use at home and if you're casually walking in the woods. The revolution in digital tools is just astounding. Merlin is a marvelous application for your phone. It's free from Cornell Laboratory. It's wonderful for identifying bird songs. You say song ID, hold it up, and it'll give you the list of birds that you're hearing. If you're out birding and want something else to be able to help identify, to actually see the bird if you haven't gotten a real good look, I like the Sibley birds. Their second edition. That you'll pay maybe $40 for, but it's worth it. And there are probably other ones as well. I settled on those two. And you really ought to have a handbook. These are three. There are Eastern guides: Kaufman, Sibley's East, Peterson's Eastern Birds. Peterson published the first really usable field guide in 1935. I like to say Peterson is the person who changed birds from a noun to a bird, so that we can go bird and do birds. And then I just picked off one backyard bird guide. If all you want is to know what the common birds are that come around your feeder, there are all kinds of those. And, Amazon will overwhelm you with the choices, or a good bird store, book store. Okay, so year-round birds. These are the birds that you're likely to, a few of the birds that you are likely to see all through the year. In the summertime, when they are nesting, they'll be the same ones that you're seeing in your neighborhood. As things turn to winter and then from fall and into winter, then many of the birds will gather in flocks, flocks of similar birds, or mixed flocks of many different kinds of birds. Some of them will move small distances, but nevertheless, these are birds which you're likely to see all year. The presence of birds year-round is dependent on food. And in the summertime, the diet is a little different. Then they need protein because they're raising young. You don't swat mosquitoes in the wintertime. They're all over the place, and the flies and the insects and all of those things. That's protein to raise birds, and they need that. And that's what, so food all year round in different forms motivates the presence and activity of birds. 3 nominated birds, and I'm just going to mention the rock pigeon, the European starling, and the house sparrow. You're perfectly okay destroying their nests. I encourage. So with a lot of others. They're not native. They take over from native birds. So I was in Nick Harrison's backyard for a few minutes earlier this afternoon, and I heard perchickoree, perchickoree, perchickoree flying over. In the springtime, if I heard a cheerful song up in the top of the tree, I'd look up and see the goldfinch. That's the perchickoree bird, or as some people like to say, the potato chip bird, because that's sort of the rhythm of the flank call, also known as the thistle bird, because it loves thistles. And it loves sunflowers. This probably a female or a young male, feeding off of a freelance sunflower in our backyard. And then in the fall and winter, they become almost little brown birds as they gather in a flock. They lose that bright yellowness and become rather drab, but still with the cheerful kind of chirping that you hear. I love the Carolina wren. This is a bird of the woodlands, of the often of the brushy edges. It's here all year. Quite able to sustain itself during the winter time, providing it can get food and water, and it will come to feeders if well, you don't see winters like this in southeastern Pennsylvania, but I used to. And it will, as I say, it comes to bird feeders and it sings any time of the year, and it's always it's a cheerful song. The eastern bluebird. There's just something charismatic about this bird. It's a sweet-looking bird. It's a lovely bird. Earth below and sky on top is how some people have described it. The female is a little drabber. They will form themselves into small flocks in the off season, as I might call it, and wander around to orchards and trees and looking for food together. This was in Schuylkill. What's the Andorra Nettles? She's building a second nest. She's got a youngster up above who'd really like to be fed, but she's building a second nest. Now, the unfortunate thing about a bluebird box is it also is liked by tree swallows and house wrens. I've seen chickadees use a similar sized box, and house sparrows. So the bluebird is a somewhat timid bird and is often has to compete with these other and sometimes more aggressive birds. In particular, with the house sparrow, kick them out. Tree swallows, they'll eat plenty of bugs to justify their presence. The house finch. Actually, this was originally native to the West Coast, and it was brought east and introduced, and does very well. Year-round bird, likes woods and edges and brushy tops, and its mate or partner is very drab little brown bird. There are a lot of them. That's the house finch. Mourning dove. These are sweet-looking birds, and I have to say, in my experience, kind of dumb. They like feeders. They're ground feeders, but they'll come up to platform feeders. I've had them on mixed feeders that are on posts. They start nesting very early. This was right outside our apartment building in Roxborough. Barely constitutes a nest, but she's sitting on. They start breeding early in the spring and then do it over and over and over. They'll do 4 or 5 breeds of 2 through the year. And there's probably, all those naive youngsters serve a purpose. I'll talk about that in a moment. Mockingbirds, they're year-round. I've never seen them gather with in other flocks. They're mimics. I once heard a truck backing up on a street outside of the apartment building, looked or couldn't see the truck anywhere, and it was a mockingbird that was imitating. They'll tend to repeat whatever it is they're mimicking 3 times. Tweet, 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 twa, 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 bee, bee, bee. You hear those kind of 3s together. That's a mockingbird singing somewhere. They are year-round. This one was on winter berries. I've seen them eating all kinds of other berries. They've got a varied diet that enables them to sustain themselves. And when they fly, they're often very spectacular. They're, gray and white bird, but with those spectacular wings and bright tail feathers. The song sparrow is often referred to as the default sparrow. This is the sparrow. If you want to figure out sparrows, learn the song sparrow first, and then you can say, well, it's not, it doesn't have that, and it's not that, and then by way of elimination. Now, a lot of people look for the song sparrow for the stick pin, that dark spot in the middle of the breast. Unfortunately, you can't always see it, but it's still a song sparrow. The dark line through the eye, the little brown spot there, the plain gray streaked head is a song sparrow. And they can survive in winter. They will find open places where they can find seeds and so on. I had to include this because I had no idea how this guy was going to swallow this. That appears to be a word. And he's carrying it, so that suggests he's got a nest somewhere. Because birds that are just feeding themselves eat it when they get the food. If they've got young in a nest or fledglings, they have to carry it. And this guy does not have a tail. It's a song sparrow. And that's to remind us that birds change their feathers at least once a year, sometimes twice. This bird has apparently molted its tail feathers or had a close encounter with a cat, one or the other. And so, sometimes birds don't look the way they're supposed to, but that's often because they're molted. Cheerful year-round fella is the tufted titmice. He's got a chatter very similar to a chickadee. He's the Peter bird because that's sort of the sound, the mnemonic that people use as to what is it. Peter, and you can hear that long distances through the forest. And it's usually a forest bird that doesn't mind coming into the open. And just a reminder, his crest is down. He's still a titmouse, but he's probably just concerned about eating right now. And he's on a suet feeder. And we were able in Vermont to use real beef suet. I don't know whether that's available around here or not. That's the best thing, I think. But there are a lot of substitutes that can be used. The white-breasted nuthatch, sometimes called the ankh bird because it says ankh. Year-round, cavity nester. Here's why it's the devil down head. He likes to crawl down the trunks, look at you from an upside down position while carrying off that sunflower seed, which he will stick in a crevice of bark in order to break it open. He doesn't have the beak to break it open himself, but he has to find it. And you know, they do wonderful acrobatics. I love them. And they just seem always so true. Downy woodpecker. This is our smallest woodpecker. It looks, in terms of its pattern, almost exactly the same as a larger cousin, the heron. This guy has a fairly petite beak. This is a male, so he's got a red spot on the back of his head. The female does not have that red spot. Here is a male feeding a young male. The young male has a red cap, not on the back of his head, but on the top. And he's bigger than Dan. I remember when my oldest grandson, when I pointed out to him, he said, the kid's so much bigger. Yeah, and that's often the case with, or sometimes the case with birds. It's tough for a young bird when it has to go out on its own to find food. So what often happens is that they get fed more than they really need. They sort of bulk up. They have extra fat reserves that will carry them through until they can learn how to do it themselves. And they either learn or they don't get to do what they're supposed to do, which is to reproduce. This is a hairy woodpecker, very similar in patterns, but look at the beak, much bigger beak. That's, you know, that's a tool there. And they like the woods just like the downy. They're a little more dependent on heavier wooded areas than they are in open areas. The male has this split red on the back, rather where the downy is solid all the way across the back. The female does not have the red spots. And here is a chance to compare the two. Hairy here and the downy here. Now the trouble with saying, well, the downy is almost twice as big as, or the hairy is almost twice as big as the downy, is that that's not helpful if they're not standing next to each other. But there are other clues. But here you can see a sense of the difference between the hairy and the downy. And these are, if you have active feeders, these are birds that are likely to come all through the year. The pileated woodpecker, this is our largest woodpecker in North America, unless somebody someday provides definitive proof that the ivory-billed still exists somewhere. And I've had more good sightings of the pileated woodpecker in Philadelphia than I had in 20 years in Vermont. In Vermont, they would fly across the road. And occasionally land someplace close by, but in Philadelphia, I've had good looks at it. This is a male with that red cheek, and the female does not have that red cheek. And the red-bellied woodpecker, a bit of a red belly here. Not always obvious, but it was people who held the birds in their hand who saw the red-belly most clearly, and that's why it gets that name and still has it. Oh, I'm sorry about that. I was afraid that was going to happen. Yeah, right there. Here we are. This is the female. Her red cap is, well, it's really just on the back. And then Dad feeding a youngster with no red cap, brownish striped on the back. But this is another bird that will come to bird feeders if you have them out there. In wetlands, a fairly common year-round bird is the great blue heron. It's year-round, providing there's open water. And if there isn't open water, it will move to where there is. They are waders, they are fishers. He catches this fish and will maneuver it around with his beak until he can swallow it head first whole. And here's a great blue heron who was ice skating at his refuge. Now, sooner or later, he was going to have to find open edge or move out to one of the rivers to feed. So, you know, short range migrants. I had to include this because I'd never seen this before. There's an osprey, a fish hawk, carrying a sizable carp and being chased by a great blue heron trying to get it to dry out. I knew eagles would steal fish from osprey, but I'd never seen a great blue try that. Wow. The wood duck. You know, it's unreal, but marvelous. And his mate is no shy butterfly either. She's gorgeous. Those iridescents. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Wissahickon Park or Valley Green, but I have seen down by the Valley Green restaurant up to 50 wood ducks in spring or fall. In the wintertime, not so likely, but I don't think they're going very far. They're probably going down along the Delaware River and some of the salt marshes along there. I think she had twice as many that were following around elsewhere. And even in late summer, when she's kind of leading the kids around, she gets a little duller than she is other times. So the American kestrel, a couple of birds of prey. This is our smallest bird of prey, our smallest falcon. I understand that there have been quite a number of kestrel boxes put up in the township, and that's very helpful. This is a female. She's got a rather plain brown back. The male, he's just gorgeous, handsome bird, and but you know, they need cavities to nest in, and those cavities have been taken over by a lot of other kinds of things. So there's a lot of competition that they face, and having the kestrel boxes is exceptionally helpful. Here's a female who is kiting over a salt marsh looking for small rodents, undoubtedly. They also feed extensively on insects, dragonflies, for example. And here's a male, and in flight, long pointed wings, typical of the falcons. Most of our falcons have some sort of a mustache, like you see here. And they do migrate. I participated in a hawk watch in Vermont, and we had quite a number of falcon kestrels that we counted during the year. But again, movement of birds is largely determined by availability of food. The red-tailed hawk we can find circling over the cities and farms all through the year. And this is a good, you know, the leading dart of the wings is very prominent here. There's a belly band, and of course that red tail is unmistakable, unless he's a juvenile, as this one is. He does not have a red tail. He does have a piece of jewelry on his leg, courtesy of the federal government, the bandit. And this was an interesting thing. This hawk this red tail over our hawk watch site was kiting over there, dropped down, obviously hunting something, then came back up and fed on the wing as he continued flying. In the fall and winter, or I mean, if they're not breeding, they would be eating their prey wherever they get it, or take it back to a favorite tree to eat it. This guy was on his way somewhere, so he was eating it on the wing. And this is a red-tailed hawk being harassed by a common raven. The ravens, the crows, the blue jays, they don't like any predators. And the raven is pretty darn close in size to the red-tailed hawk. So a few words about bird feeders. We've seen several along the way. This is a tube feeder. I love the tube feeders. There were three of them. This one happens to have a tube for thistles, which the goldfinch love. And now I had to replace my tube feeders about once a year, and I'll tell you why in a moment. This is a thistle feeder right outside a window. There is a pine siskin here as well. They love the thistles. And one way to keep birds from flying into your window is to put the bird feeder as close to the window as possible. Here's another one as close as possible. And the goldfinches like the sunflower seeds. So do the blue jays. And I'm putting in a good word for the blue jays right now. You want them at your feeders. I'm sorry, I don't know. Even though they'll stand on a bulk feeder and empty it before they eat a seed, but they're doing things for the ground feeders. Okay. These guys are very alert. I often get told that, oh, they're bullies, they chase other birds away, but I've seen doves do the same thing. They're big birds coming in. If you're a little bird and something big's coming in, you move. Then you come back. They're also acrobatic, and they love real bee soup. This guy's working on our tube feeder. Look at his crop here. He's filling it up. Now, this is a sign that he's not going too far. He's going to take those seeds off and cache them somewhere, and then come back and get more. And then, you know, they'll clean up on the ground. But look at all of those blue jays there. Now, and here's a platform feeder with doves on the ground and a cardinal, and I think those are common red poles on the platform. Now, I'm sorry about that. Okay, and then down below this flock of doves, I think there were 30 or 35 in the flock, which was fairly typical in early winter. Now, here's another feeder bird. This is a sharp-shinned hawk, and it specializes in catching birds and dining on them. It is designed for chasing things through the woods. Relatively short, rounded wings, a long tail, all of which allows it to maneuver. The sharp-shin has a relatively small head. This is a Cooper's hawk. The adults look almost exactly like the sharp-shin, but they're considerably bigger. They have relatively short, rounded wings. The Cooper's has a big head and a sort of rounded tail. Now, as I say, these are birds that specialize in catching other birds. Now, If you're a hungry sharp-shinned hawk, like this one, and you're flying by and you see birds at a feeder and you make a quick course correction, and there are blue jays down on the ground and there's some goldfinch down on the ground, which are you going to go? The blue jay. From a half an ounce to 3.5 ounces, you know, we're expending the same amount of energy to go after the blue jay as you would after the goldfinch, and you get a much bigger payoff. And I often found evidence of that. I also found evidence. You saw that flock of 30, 35 doves. I would see those in the early fall. By the end of winter, that number in the tree was down to around 10, 12. There you have it again. If you're feeding birds, it's not always going to be pretty, but be honest. And give the other birds a chance to make a living as well. Yeah. Okay. Here's my sermon. Keep your cats indoors. They kill millions of birds a year. Okay? I have 2 daughters, and between them, they have 9 cats. And they haven't heard the sermon yet. Okay, chipmunks will help you clean up their mess. This guy is filling his cheek pouches. Red squirrels are audacious. Yeah, gray squirrels are a problem too. And all the thousands of pictures I've got, I couldn't find a picture of a gray squirrel. Probably because I was chasing them away instead of taking pictures. But red squirrels were really a problem as well. Caught them.
Oh my God.
Yeah, this is the tube feeder that I had to replace recently. Skunks would come by and help clean up the mess sometimes. I don't know whether you have any problem with these guys or not, but I did. This is the reason why, if I forgot to bring my feeders in at night in the spring and summer, why I had to replace them. Okay, winter birds. These are birds that have come from the northern forests in Canada, northern New England, or the higher elevations in Pennsylvania and New York, and more or less spend the winter with us. In my experience, one of the most common ones is the white-throated sparrow, the poor Sam. His song is something like poor Sam, peabody, peabody, peabody. And other times I hear just that plaintive poor Sam. They usually show up early in the fall. I heard of poor Sam in the middle of May, so there were still a few around. But they don't nest here, they go to the north. White throat, white stripe, yellow lory. But not always. Barely a white throat, a hint of a yellow lory, and a brown stripe. Now that brown stripe, which is probably this one, they have a most interesting mating pattern. The white stripe mates with the female brown stripe, and the brown stripe male mates with the female white stripe. And they have differences in their nesting success and their song and other characteristics. That, as far as I know, that's unique among birds. Since the very first colonists, European colonists in America, this has been the snowbird, and it still is. The dark-eyed jungle. Come on, let's keep the name there. The dark-eyed jungle. This guy shows up in the wintertime. He's the snowbird when it's snowing. The female usually is a plainer colored bird, showing up in the fall, attracted to feeders, basically a ground feeder, but it will come up to a platform. The white throat, I've been at the Schuylkill Center, for example, and I have a bunch of brush here, and it just moves slowly through the brush. And there'll be 50, 60 in a flock. Juncos are often like that. This is one of my favorite sparrows, the fox sparrow. Not nearly as common as the other two, but a regular visitor I know at Hines Refuge, and so I would expect around here as well. Looks a little bit like a song sparrow on steroids. Similar kind of pattern, but here in the east, a lovely, warm, russet color, and with a very prominent stick pin. And here in early spring with a couple of white throats. They're all heading north. The yellow-rumped warbler is in the wintertime, a little brown bird, basically, but still has its bright yellow rump. Will often move in flocks, loosely connected flocks. Here feeding on the berries of a juniper, and then come spring, they molt into something very different and stunning, and disappear to the northern woods to breed. I suspect this is very rare, rather rare and hard to find, but the golden crowned kinglet is our smallest perching songbird, and just, I shouldn't use terms like this, but a darling little bird with that bright yellow crown. And he comes down out of the higher mountains. I don't think it comes from New England, but it comes down and can be found in pine forests or loose areas like that. This was at Pines in a section that had a lot of pine trees, and I've seen them in Cape May and some of the pine groves there. I just like that. Summer birds. These are birds that come from the tropics, Central America, or they come from what I sometimes call the pseudo-tropics of the southern United States, the southern states. These are birds that are basically withdrawn from our area in the fall and winter and return when the weather gets better. Three very quick blackbirds. The red-winged is unmistakable. The grackle, a larger, very iridescent bird, and the cowbird, which is hated by everybody because it's a brood parasite. It drops its eggs in other birds' nests and leaves the rearing to them. And when it drops it in the nest of a smaller bird, it will overwhelm the baby bird, the native bird. American redstart, bird of the forest, open forest, beautifully colored male. The female has the same pattern, but where he's black, she's gray, and where he's orange, she's yellow. So when they get up north and are ready to breed, the birds sing. The male sings in order to attract a mate. He is saying, look at me, aren't I great? Look at my beautiful colors, aren't I great? It's the male who's singing in order to attract the female, and he spends a lot of energy doing that, because he's also chasing off rival males. Okay, so remember, the male sings. Well, this looks like a female, doesn't it? With yellow there, and we can't see it too clearly here, but gray and yellow there. The redstart doesn't come into its full, the male does not come into its full breeding plumage until at least the second year after it hatched. So this is a breeding male who is singing. With a few exceptions, it's the male that sings. And here is a female on the nest. The Baltimore Oriole, when I see him at the top of a tree, it's an uncommon bird. It's just, he really is funny. Likes fruit trees and open areas. Loves the sweetness of the flowers. By the way, on 4 or 5 different birding trips I've done in Central America, I have always seen the Baltimore Oriole. Yeah, they go to the tropics. They don't sing, but they're there in the tropics. Those webworms that you hate, well, they love them. Worms hanging all down there. That's protein. And that's important. This is his nest, a hanging nest like that. And they make it new every year. I think the two of them work on it together. And basically, he helps her raise the kids. And they love suet sometimes. And on some occasions, they even come to oranges when I put them out. Brown thrasher, this is a second mimic that we have. Likes brushy edges and with some open area in front. Another mimic, but this one goes B, B, O, O, Z, Z, 2 notes at a time as he sings. And we'll come to feeders. And when they fly across the open, you get this flash of a long rufous tail, rufous on the wings. It doesn't hold still like that. But here he is, still fairly early spring, and carrying food, so that suggests he's got a nest nearby. Chipping sparrow, another little brown bird, early returner. Sometimes they get there ahead of time, but still they sing. They're a handsome little bird, red cap, black line through the eye, white stripe, plain breast, no stick pin on this time. And here we have a family. One of the adults is over here, and these are all kids. And so, while that first chipping sparrow was very clear in being able to identify, here are chipping sparrows that don't look like that because they haven't quite gotten full grown and gotten mature plumage. Witchety, 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 witchety. This is the common yellowthroat. Cheerful song, usually likes wetlands or something wet, or at least wet stuff that's nearby, but all kinds of habitats, even just moist woodlands. A curious little guy. You can attract his attention, he'll pop out, take a look at you, and then disappear back in. My nickname for him is the Black Mass Rogue. And here's his mate, another plain bird. When they fly, very plain looking. EAC. This is an early returning flycatcher. And this is a guy that loves to sing outside a window. Beep, 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 monotonously over and over again. And their hunting technique, and clear as field mark, is the wagging tail. It wags its tail. Okay? Here's a youngster. These are the ones that if you leave the garage door might come in and build a nest inside, or if you've got a little bit of molding sticking out over a window, might build a nest over the top of that, or less conveniently over the top of your doorway. They like covering over their head. When the pavilion gets built, they'll build nests in there, in all likelihood. And they are flycatchers, which is why they leave in the wintertime. They will perch on a branch, wag their tail, drop down, Here's where things sometimes get difficult. This looks just like almost exactly like the eastern peavy, but this is the eastern wood peavy. This is a bird that is more likely, in my experience, to be seen, to be heard than seen. Sings in the woods, peewee, peewee, peewee. And, you know, on a couple of occasions, they have, for some mysterious reason, come right down in front of me where I can get a photo, but not often. Gray catbird is the last of our mimics. And I put this picture in because I want you to see the red under the tail. We don't always see that, but it's a rather plain gray bird, but I don't know, a very cheerful one. And very curious. You try to attract its attention or attract the attention of birds. It'll be the first one to come out and tell you what's what. They begin nesting in this area very early. This was about May 5th, around the Roxborough Reservoir, where probably she was building a nest. And they're one of the most common birds in our woodlands in the summertime. They love beef suet. Now we come to the house wren. The house wren has a pugnacious attitude. I've seen it chase any number of other birds out of their nest. They will scold you if you get too near to their nest. They nest in boxes, the same kind of box that would be suitable for eastern bluebird, but a very cheerful bird. And one of the homes we lived in, we had them nesting in a box right outside our bedroom window, and they raised their brood and then went to the far corner of the yard in another box and raised a second brood, and then moved to a third box in a cherry tree on the side of the house, and then disappeared. And I went to clean out, and this happened a couple of years. This was around the middle of August. And one time I found the nest, that third nest, full of eggs, and another time I found it full of dead hatchlings. It was time to leave, and they left. Even though they hadn't finished raising the brood, it was time for them to give attention to their survival for the next year. If they don't leave in time, all part of that cycle. But you know, I still found that amazing. As I said, these guys chatter away all through the summer. Oh my God, there's an indigo bunting on the top of the tree. Hear a cheerful song up there, and you look up and you see a little dark spot on the top of the tree. And then you put binoculars up, and it's this brilliant blue. I have had it come to my feeders on a couple of occasions, and it isn't often I could get it up quite that close. This is a winter male. Now, the female is even plainer brown all year round than the male is, but the male in the wintertime loses all of that color, and then in the spring molts into that brilliant blue. Another look at it. And another one at the top of the tree. Orchard orioles like orchids. Okay, that makes sense, doesn't it? Relative of the Baltimore oriole. Here's a female working on her nest. Now, I thought this was interesting when I looked back at this, because this is why she is a plain yellow. She just kind of blends in. And this is so often the case with the birds. The female will be indistinct in its color, in her color. And that's because she's more likely to be sitting on the nest, building the nest. She wants to be inconspicuous, if at all possible. Because there are bigger birds, there are snakes, there are squirrels that will prey on the nest. And this is another of those birds where the male doesn't get its full plumage until 2 years after it has hatched. This is a male, and it is feeding young in the nest. So here is a breeding male perchickoree that hatched the year before and breeding successfully in its first year. And here he is again, but I wanted you to see the jewelry, courtesy of the U.S. government. Oh my God, the rose-breasted grosbeak. Another bird of the woodlands for breeding, and I don't know if they breed around here or just go further north. They need, I think they're more likely to need the heavier woods of the higher elevations. But there was this one spring when I think there's only 4 here, right? I think I had 6 altogether in the yard at one time. Really was fun. And I'm happy to say I was able to help raise some groups. Here we have a male feeding an infant or a youngster. And here's the female rose-breasted grosbeak, a big round bird, not a little one, but very, very plain looking. Some pretty stark contrast. Ruby-throated hummingbird. Now, that neck is an iridescent. The feathers there are iridescent. And if the light doesn't strike it, you're not going to see the red. You may see just black on that neck. And the female, a very plain bird. But the male's very aggressive in defending their territory. And I had a friend who, they do this flight like this. A friend of mine, rather down-to-earth potter, used to describe their mating as wham, bam, thank you, man. It was something that, very quick, but, and then the female is left to do the rest of the raising. That nest, half the size of my hand, very, very small. And marvelous, marvelous in the air. And hummingbirds are unique to the Western Hemisphere. Oh my God, let's start on the tangent. This again is a woodlands bird. It does not often come down where you can get a good look at it. I hear a robin with a cold singing in the woods in the Wissahickon Valley. And just to be sure, I use the Merlin app to get the sound ID, and it's a scarlet tanager. So they nest quite frequently if there are some contiguous woods around, but very elusive. Tree swallows come back early, sometimes also too early. They gather by the flocks of thousands when they're leaving in the fall, and all of a sudden are back in the springtime. I just kind of like this one. And there's lots of squabbling that's going on as they try to pick their nest site and pick their mate for the season. The wood thrush is one of the finest singers we have in the woods. Bird of the middle heights, quite secretive, a wonderful songster. If you've never heard it, get the Merlin app or Sibley and play its song. They stay pretty hidden in the middle range of the forest. Now, we were in Belize this last March. Those guys were coming to the bird feeders. Just complete change in personality from the secretiveness that is typical on their breeding ground where they winter. The yellow warbler, common in brushy edge, marshy areas where there are trees. The male has this wonderful bright red streak. The female a little plainer. She is building a nest here. I suspect this is a nest in which a cowbird has dropped an egg, and so she's built another layer, and then another cowbird dropped another egg, and she's built a third layer. I'm guessing. Now, if I'd been Alexander Wilson, I would have gone, or Audubon, I would have gone and taken that nest down to find out. Obviously, I wasn't going to do that, but to have a big nest like that, I suspect she's covering up some cowbirds. Here is a completely different bird in a nest that she is still building when I saw her here, so a much smaller nest. And early May, the Times Refuge and the male is carrying food, so that means there's an active nest somewhere. And that's also a clue as to why he comes up here to breed, because there's lots of food that suddenly appears. And just three, oh my God, birds of passage. These are birds that pass through. The Blackburnian warbler, the black-throated green, and the magnolia. These are all going to northern woodlands. These are some of the birds that give bird watchers warbling, because they like the tops of the trees. They don't often come down lower, but they're birds of passage. I just couldn't, I had to at least give a sampling of those. So some nagging questions. Do robins eat worms? Well, of course they do. All know that. Even a 5-year-old knows that. But they're also vegetarians come winter time. Berries provide sugar, and sugar provides calories, and that's what they need against the cold or against long flights. Are robins a sign of spring? No, they're not. They're here all year. It just, I cringe every time I hear some weather person on the television say, well, we got a call from so-and-so and such and such a place, and they just saw a robin, so it must be spring. They've been here all year. Even in winter time, they're here all year. As long as they can find food. And they aren't finding it in one place, they'll move someplace else. The species name has been migratorious since the very beginning. It's always a bird that moves around. Do geese fly south for the winter? Well, yes and no. There are native populations of geese that still nest in the northern forest and the Arctic, and they fly south. There's a friend of mine in Vermont who took a picture of a goose that had, I think it was a big yellow band, although it could have been a lake band, I don't remember, but it was big enough that he was able to identify, you could see the number on it. And he posted this online someplace a number of years ago. And a few days later, he gets an email from a scientist in Denmark who tells him that he had banded this bird in Greenland that summer. So they migrate. Now, when Alexander Wilson was doing this, he talked about hearing the geese flying over in the springtime, flying south in the wintertime. But someplace along the line, some geese from the west, which were never migratory, were brought in and introduced here. And why move if you don't have to? And then there were conservationists who said, along the Mississippi flyway, well, we've got to help the geese, so we'll make a refuge and plant corn so they can feed. Well, the geese stopped there. But there was plenty of food. So why fly to Louisiana if there's enough food here? Come on, that's expensive to fly there. So they stayed put. So it's yes and no. The big flocks of geese that we see around here are probably mixtures of those that were raised locally and came down from the north. And then they may separate themselves come springtime or may not. So, yeah. There's a goose landing on the ice. Now they're going to move down to where the water's open. But there's lots of farmland around here. And how often are the fields covered with snow? Not that often. So there's lots of places where they can glean for food. And the ones that stay local begin nesting very early. I've seen broods of geese as early as March. So they get going as soon as they can. What's that big black bird up in the sky? We see them circling over there. Well, most likely it's a turkey vulture. The turkey vulture is characterized by this deep V or dihedral in its wings. And they tilt as they're flying, and they usually circle as they're trying to find rising thermals to get aloft so that they can go and find food. The turkey vulture is characterized by the gray feathers in the trailing wing and that red head that I'm sure a mother loves. They're the garbage men of nature. The black vulture is becoming a little more common in the north. It has a dihedral also, but not quite as extensive of a V shape as it's flying. The most prominent features are the white on the end of the wings. This white here is a trick of light. It's usually black. And a tail that looks like somebody brought some shears and just sort of flipped it off. So short, stubby tail, white at the end of the wings. The bald eagle. Now, who can mistake a bald eagle, right? But they don't get mature white head and feathers until about the 5th year. They fly with black plank wings, little tip at the end. Even at a distance, you can pick out the white head and the white tail, unless it's an immature bird. Then there's no, this is still a bald eagle, but no white on the head or tail. Feathers that look a little ragged, maybe it's starting to mold there. But prominent head and wings that looks like they're 2x12 attached to its body. Big, broad wings. Why does that cardinal keep banging into my window? Well, here is where we should maybe have put a warning out for mature audiences only. I once had somebody call me up and say, why is the cardinal banging into my window? Or it could have been a problem. And my answer was testosterone. The male has raging hormones. He sees another male in that window and he's going to chase him away. Birds go through some dramatic physical changes through the course of a year. In the wintertime, their gonads, their testes or ovaries shrink to practically nothing. If they've got to fight cold weather, if they've got a long flight to make, they don't need that extra weight to carry. Then in spring, something is triggered. I've never had a satisfactory answer as to what, but those organs expand in size and the hormones start to go. And the urge to mate and reproduce just rages. Wintertime, let's just get through it. Just, we need sugar, we need good insulation in our feathers in order to get through that cold. Then comes spring, we can deal with those other guys and hold our own with them. So that we can do this, raise young, and extend our genetic heritage to the next generation. So now it's your turn. If you've got any questions or comments, let's do the best we can. Yes.
Leaders, I mean, they would just, a lot of squirrels.
Yeah, I once had a woman come up to me after church and she said, Chris, how can I keep the squirrels off my feet? And I said, Vera, you can't. They're smart. Now, there are some things that you can do. I used a heavy post and with a 2x4. There's a metal thing you can get to pound in the ground, stick post it. And then on top, right at the very top, I took a 3-foot piece of stovepipe and stuck it at the very top. And then because the darn things were smart, I had to add netting around the top so they couldn't squeeze through the little hole. That's one thing to keep them from climbing the pole. Squirrel baffles, maybe. Don't hang them from a tree. They'll get there. They should all, a figure should also be at least 12 feet from anything that they can jump from. And so, that means putting it out in the middle of the yard. And if it's a very active figure, you're going to have a mess on the ground.
Okay, with them on the ground.
So that's my best guess, yeah.
In the beginning of your presentation, you said something that bothered me,
Okay.
and that was, and I'd like you to speak to it, destroying birds or their habitat. You were talking about European birds that were not native.
Yes.
Anyway, I'd like you to address that.
Okay.
I have a difficult time with the idea of destroying birds.
I understand.
Or their nest.
I understand. Pigeons, starlings, house sparrows, they're all non-native. The unfortunate thing about non-native birds, when they get in here, there were maybe 60 or 100 starlings that were introduced a couple of times in New York City. And you know what they're like now. They crowd out native birds. They take over the nesting places that native birds like. They have none of the natural enemies that would control their population where they originate from. The irony is that in Britain, the house sparrow is having a lot of trouble, and it's a beloved little bird in Britain. But its population, from what I understand, has been declining. And that's the thing. They're aggressive enough that they will keep out many of the birds that are native and that really are, birds that we love. And the only thing that can really be done is to, destroy their nest.
So humans then become their prey.
That's right. I wish I could tell you that the hawks did a job for us as well, but they don't always. I was once at a program on hawks, and the person was talking about a Cooper's hawk that was nesting in a park in New York, Brooklyn or something like that. And they had a nest there. And the person just sort of casually said that, if we were monitoring the nest, and one day we saw the hawk come in with a cowbird, and everybody spontaneously clapped because the cowbird is a bird that parasitizes other natives. Now, it wasn't a starling or a house sparrow or a pigeon. There is there's an international migratory bird treaty which protects all migratory birds, with the exception of a few game birds, such as the mourning dove. And the exceptions are the pigeon, other exceptions are the pigeon, the starling, and the house sparrow. Those birds are not protected. So, and when we say protected, it means you can't have an egg of that bird. These birds, you can't have feathers. Somebody saw a blog that I was doing a number of years ago, and I had pictures of blue jay feathers from a blue jay that was taken by a hawk. And I got this email from somebody in Britain that said, "Could you send me some of those feathers?" And I said, "No, because it's against the migratory bird treaty to do that, to trade with them in any way." So I understand the sensitivity, and I have never destroyed a nest. Okay.
I'm sorry, I apologize for coming to you with a negative, with what I interpreted
That's okay.
to be negative. Do brown-headed cowbirds build their own nest?
No.
Okay, that's the answer that I want.
Okay. No, they don't.
So why would you, because in your you mentioned that towards the end of the presentation, a particular bird that actually layered its nest 2 or 3 different times.
That was a yellow warbler.
Right, and you said, unless I interpreted it incorrectly, something about invading that nest because the brown-headed cowbirds had laid their eggs there.
Oh, yeah. Modern bird study, modern ornithology is very careful about protecting birds. But up until, actually not too many years ago, maybe middle of the last century, 1950s, ornithologists, the number one tool of the ornithologist was a shotgun. And that was the only, they didn't have binoculars, they didn't have cameras, they didn't have the kind of tools that we have. So that the only way they could really study a bird was to collect it, which is a nice way to say kill it, and then take it back to their lab and dissect it. Today, with DNA studies, they can take a bird, that orchard oriole that we had, that was a young one that was banded, they probably picked that out of the nest just before it fledged and put a band on it, and then put it back in. So, it was not in any way harmful to the raising of that brood to do so. So banding is one way, and this netting, I've been with some people several times who were misnetting. They put these very spiny nets across the place, and the birds run into them, and they get caught, and they go and get picked out, dropped in a little bag, taken back to a processing place where they are checked for health, measured, weighed, and given a little band, and then released. Sometimes they aren't happy about it, but there's no downtime.
What I was addressing was brown-headed cowbirds don't build their own nests.
No.
So they have to lay their eggs somewhere.
Yeah.
So why the negative take on it?
Oh, because they really do impact the breeding success of other birds. It essentially means that this yellow warbler, if that egg hatches, if that stays there and is incubated, she isn't raising any of her own.
Right, I got that.
Okay.
But the brown-headed cowbird doesn't have any alternative.
Yep, you're right. And the brown-headed cowbird probably developed this as it was following the herds of buffalo and other hoofed animals across the plains, and it couldn't stay put to build a nest and raise its own. So this happened. Then we started clearing the woods, and running roads through the woods, and the the cowbirds just, kept right on going. The problem with cowbirds is really a reflection of the damage that we've done to the environment.
Really, about the cowbird,
Yeah.
for the backyard, very recently, the house finch raised cowbird chicks.
Yeah.
And I saw smaller house finch were feeding cowbird baby bird from our
Yeah.
bird feeder. So even cowbird, I learned the robins just keep the eggs out from their own nest, but still cowbirds are successful,
Oh, yeah.
feeding their,
Yeah.
substitute parents. So even some birds destroy or try to sort of mitigate sort of
Yeah.
parasiting, still there are successful rates.
That's
So
right.
cowbirds can increase by such kind of successful,
Yeah.
chances.
That's exactly what happens. I've heard the cowbird female described as the hen chicken of the natural world. It's been estimated that she can drop as many as 30 eggs in other birds' nests over the course of a year, where most birds might have a chance of raising 4 or 5 young. She may be, if she picks the right kind of nest, and the other birds don't know how to deal with it, she may be getting a whole lot more than 4 or 5. But the other thing is, and this is the irony, we hate the cowbird, but we don't really take responsibility for what humans have done in changing the environment. I think we've got time for one more.
I can speak to the house sparrow. For years, we've had bluebirds, orange swallows, tree swallows, and over the past 2 years, the house sparrow has totally run them off the farm.
Yeah.
So we do destroy every nest that we find.
Yeah.
They're an invasive bird. They'll peck holes in some of the other eggs, the bluebird eggs. So we get rid of them.
Thank you very much. I've got a few books here if anybody is interested. If you want to know more about Wilson and Audubon, a few birds is the one to look at. I also am enamored of the crow family, the blue jays, the crows, the magpies, and there's a book on that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.